Chapter 39, Can't Play by the Rules. CDC administrators had agreed to transfer Rene Enriquez closer to home at Lancaster State Prison, about 75 miles north of Los Angeles. First, he had to spend 3 months in a transitional housing unit, THU, on the main line at Pelican Bay. It was a trial period made to test his ability to live peacefully in an open unit with other inmates. Another Mafia dropout walked up and told him the routine when he arrived, and then he left him alone on the yard. Rene kicked off his shoes and socks and started walking barefoot in the grass. He'd only had concrete to stand on for more than a decade. It was a hot June day, and he smelled manure baking on the lawn and felt the soft green blades poking up through his toes, massaging the bottom of his feet. He started chicken scratching the turf as if he were a little kid. There was a lump in my throat as I experienced a simple freedom. In the coming weeks, he trained pigeons on the yard. I started by feeding them bread, sunflower seeds, and top ramen noodles off the toe of my shoe. Eventually, they ate right out of my hand. It got so they would fly in by the dozens when I made my brrr sound. And they followed me around on the ground like a trail of ducks. He'd throw rocks at enemy seagulls, then tried to attack them and called the pigeons my little dogs. It was something I could care for, explained Rene, and I loved them. Soon, Mafia dropouts Angel Valencia and Chino Delgadillo were helping him tend to his flock. He worked as a clerk in the IGI's office, deciphering Mafia mail and audio tapes. Rene also listened to loads of surveillance tapes shipped down from Pelican Bay State Prison while incarcerated at Los Angeles County Sheriff's Substation. A familiar theme developed during his transitions. Senator Gloria Romero, a former psychology professor, was, according to an inmate's relative, communicating with EME associate Steve Castillo. And in the mind of Rene and several gang investigators, she was being used by the Mafia. The same was true, they felt, for her aide, Rocky Rushing, who had earlier worked for Senator Tom Hayden during the Pelican Bay State Prison peace talks. Romero had become a vocal critic of the California Department of Corrections, suggesting that correctional officers and administrators were responsible for even more than brutality and corruption, and held the purse strings to its nearly $6 billion budget. After EME associate Castillo filed his lawsuit designed to shut down the SHU, his cause was championed by Senator Romero. The Los Angeles area politician, whose Senate biography described her as a dedicated social activist and aggressive prison reformer, planned Senate hearings to explore inmate Castillo's contention that hundreds of prisoners were misidentified as gang affiliates with flimsy and trivial information and held in the SHU unjustly for indeterminate amounts of time. Castillo and his lawsuit were also backed by an inmate rights group called California Prison Focus, CPF. One of the people working with CPF is Bato, a reputed Mexican Mafia member. Rene tells it this way: he's a made guy who has a veiled front as an activist. Bato was also a 2-strike felon acquitted for his alleged part in the 1971 San Quentin prison uprising that left 3 prison guards and 2 inmates dead. CPF's president Ed Mead was a convicted domestic terrorist who served 18 years in prison for blowing up a Safeway supermarket in the 1970s to show support for Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. He had been officially banned from Pelican Bay. The United Farm Workers helped Romero get elected, and she was an active partner with CPF in so-called prison reforms. Charles Carbone was CPF's attorney. Although he could point to a number of prison reform measures he had championed over the years, he was widely viewed by law enforcement as merely a mob attorney. He was EME member Jaco Padilla's former father-in-law. Rene Enriquez, no relation, knew that Jesse and Jaco were very close, despite the fact that Jaco was no longer married to his daughter. And according to what Jesse claimed on the Pelican Bay State Prison surveillance tapes, Jesse was also a confidant of Senator Romero and Steve Castillo. Jesse regularly alternated his visits with inmates Jaco and Castillo, and he talked about what he characterized as his cozy relationship with the senator. Rene had warned his debriefers that EME was trying to get influence in the Senate to force the CDC to the negotiating table, implement more prison rights, and get released from the SHU. Devin Hawks and Lieutenant Ernie Madrid, during a gang task force meeting in Los Angeles shortly afterward, tried to get the FBI to tap the phones of Senator Romero, her aide Rocky Rushing, and Jesse Enriquez. No taps were ever authorized. During a trip to Pelican Bay in June 2003, Romero met with 5 prison gang members, 3 from La EME, 1 from the Black Guerrilla family, and 1 from the Aryan Brotherhood. One gang investigator called the meeting peculiar and described Romero's attitude toward the staff as snooty and condescending. At one point, she challenged an officer's qualifications to investigate the mafia. According to prison surveillance tapes of meetings between Jesse Enriquez and prison inmates, Enriquez claimed that he kept meeting with Romero and other politicians, convincing them that conditions at Pelican Bay SHU were inhumane. Jaco Padilla was caught on tape appreciatively describing his ex-father-in-law as a slick old fogey. Romero moved ahead with their plans for a Senate hearing to examine the effectiveness of the SHUs, focusing on the validation process that identified inmates as EME members. The hearing date was coordinated with the timeline of Steve Castillo's lawsuit designed to shut down the SHU altogether. In the meantime, Deputy Attorney General Gregory Walston was litigating the Castillo case for the state. There was a lot of political cowardice to undermine the will of the Department of Corrections to have their day in court. Correctional officers sincerely felt that SHU policies were not just constitutional, but necessary to protect the lives of officers from some of the most dangerous criminals there are. This was not a decision that should have been decided politically. Meanwhile, Walston said the state was more and more focused on settling to save money, and he didn't want to settle that case at all. He felt that money won by Castillo and CPF would end up in the hands of gangster crooks to buy drugs and orchestrate hits. So Walston sought Rene Enriquez's advice on how to battle Castillo's legal action. "How can we break Castillo?" asked the government lawyer. "It was simple, Counsel Rene. Jaco Padilla is close to Castillo. Get Jaco to drop out of the mafia and Castillo's lawsuit will disappear." Rene, Angel Valencia, and Chino Delgadillo, all recent dropouts offering their counsel to government investigators, concur. Rene says that all 3 of them advised, "You can't play by the rules. Toss ethics out the window. You were dealing with murderers here." So the Deputy Attorney General set up a humbug visit with Rene's former cellmate and friend, Jaco Padilla. He threatened to make Padilla a hostile witness for the state and divulged the fact that he met secretly with Lieutenant Madrid several times to talk about mafia business. Jaco may have thought he was working Madrid in those meetings, said Rene, but it was the other way around. Padilla was visibly shaken. Several days later, Lieutenant Madrid pulled Jaco out of his cell. The IGI, under strict orders from the warden, reluctantly threatened to leak information that Padilla was cooperating with authorities. Previously, he had assured Jaco that everything they discussed was strictly confidential. Padilla, knowing he was being extorted to influence Castillo, felt double-crossed and left angry. The strong-arm tactic had backfired. After that encounter, a diabolical male voice left a message on Lieutenant Madrid's telephone. "I'll blow your fucking head off." Also, a huila was found in a prison transportation van spelling out that a hit had been placed on the cowboy lieutenant. On August 3, 2003, Jesse Enriquez was recorded telling his son-in-law, Jaco Padilla, that he would be getting the names of 3 canaries, EME informants, scheduled to testify at Romero's Senate hearing. He claimed that a Senate aide was going to supply the names. Those were Rene Boxer Enriquez, Angel Valencia, and David Chino Delgadillo. This was a serious breach of security. Rene believed that Senator Gloria Romero or her aides must have been leaking sensitive information to Jesse Enriquez, and he was passing it on to the mafia. In his opinion, the organization was using her office to further their objectives. A correctional officer filed a report saying that he heard Castillo on the yard telling another inmate that Senator Romero works with us. Around that time, the Los Angeles Times printed an article about an inmate hunger strike at Pelican Bay designed to help close down the SHU. Jesse Enriquez was interviewed for the piece, and gang intelligence officers complained that it erred in making the California prison-focused lawyer Carbone and Steve Castillo look credible. In July, Steve Castillo had been stabbed by a cellmate and seriously injured. The hitman was Ray Termite Vara, allegedly sent by MS Daniel Guate Grajeda. Boxer, along with more than a dozen hardcore Mexican Mafia members, always thought hunger strikes were a boneheaded idea. Their thinking was that the mafia wasn't a political group. Boxer Enriquez had been among those who believed that if the mob wanted to make a statement, let's just kill a couple of cops during visiting. That was the EME way, argued Boxer. Eventually, Castillo was hit, a genuine mafia protest by the rival Grajeda faction. Senator Romero called the prison shortly after the attack on Castillo. According to CDC investigators, she seemed to believe that the hit had been a CDC setup. In truth, Castillo was the man trying to get Mexican mafia members out of their shoe accommodations and was given thanks with the shank. Immediately, he began talking to prison staff about rolling over. He'd had enough of La EME. Soon after the stabbing, CPF attorney Charles Carbone called the warden and demanded to have an immediate telephone conversation with his prized client. Then Jesse Enriquez quickly arranged to visit Castillo and delivered a message to hold firm, go back to the shoe, and not get locked up in protective custody. Jesse Enriquez again claimed to Castillo that he was working closely with Senator Romero, her aide Rocky Rushing, and CPF lawyer Carbone. Jesse Enriquez met with his former son-in-law Jaco Padilla on August 2nd, the day before he met Castillo. According to Enriquez, the crooks and the politicians feared that the Senate, shoe hearing, and the lawsuit were dead if Castillo dropped out of the picture. Devin Hawks said that caused us concern that Romero was getting involved in EME, that she would discourage Castillo's dropping out. If he did, he would tell the truth about La EME, and that would ruin their whole case against the shoe. There is no evidence that she urged Castillo to stay in the mafia. Castillo also tried to get a warning out to Romero to check under her car for a bomb. He knew La EME still wanted her support, and the senator could be killed if she backed off her anti-shoe stance. After that, Castillo returned to a cell in the shoe and cut off all communications with Romero. The California Highway Patrol, CHP, came to the prison twice to investigate the bomb threat. Padilla was interviewed. Ultimately, the CHP determined that the senator was not in danger because she planned to go forward with her plans to have a hearing. Jim Moreno, a former college linebacker who was the senior special agent at the Special Services Unit, was also under pressure to make the hearing and the Castillo lawsuit go away. He was further incensed by the death threats made against Lieutenant Madrid and a subsequent EME green light put on gang intelligence officer Lieutenant Robert Marquez. Rene Enriquez, serving as an advisor, stood with the lieutenant just a few feet away in the corridor behind the IGI office and secretly listened to the conversation. He heard Moreno menacingly threaten to destroy Padilla's mafia career, his father-in-law, and entire family. He wanted Jaco to roll it up so badly, he shipped him out to Corcoran State Prison on the Midnight Express and made other mafiosos think Padilla was cooperating. Jaco was stressed, remembered Rene, but he held on. On September 15, 2003, Senator Romero convened a hearing of the Senate Select Committee on the California Correctional System. She opened the proceeding by saying, "It is much more expensive to house an inmate in a shoe." Then Romero explained that she wanted to focus on the validation process, about which she had very serious concerns, including due process rights, being utilized by CDC, a lack of oversight of the process by which it determined whether a shoe inmate continues to be an active gang member or associate. She complained that a validated gang member could conceivably spend the rest of his life in a shoe. The senator posed the question, are we, as community members, safer because of shoes? Rene Enriquez, speaking from an insider's view, thought the senator was naive. She doesn't understand, explained Rene. There are EME members like Wate Grajeda and Wedo Sherm Leon who are just bitter, vicious, evil men who have no place in society. All they seek to do is destroy because they are miserable and want others to be miserable. Next to testify at the hearing was former state senator Richard Polanco, who was introduced by Romero as instrumental in addressing this issue, shoes. Polanco noted that he grew up on the gang-infested east side of Los Angeles. Then he criticized the debriefing process for depending on snitching. He questioned the CDC's method of defining gang membership as too subjective a methodology and complained that the gang validation process depended on rather old information supplied by inmates. Polanco is an idiot, said Rene. He's advocating the complete shutdown of the shoe. He was dumb because he blindly went forward and jumped on the liberalization of prisoner rights and so-called draconian shoe conditions because it was the politically correct thing to do. Another speaker at the hearing was CPF attorney Charles Carbone, introduced by Romero as an integral player in the discussions with the California Department of Corrections in reforming the security housing units. Carbone disapproved of the SHU policy as punishment through segregation on a prisoner according to their potential to commit violence, rather than an actual act of violence. He complained that officers were poorly trained, and he described debriefing as the McCarthyism model, one in which inmates are simply naming names without evidence of wrongdoing. The CPF attorney recommended increased visiting and phone calls with family members to help rehabilitate SHU inmates. Ridiculous, said Renee. There are worse places than Pelican Bay SHU. Besides, it should be worse. Hardcore mafiosi should be stripped down in their cells until they are ready to leave the organization. That appears to be torturous treatment, but it keeps them from communicating with the outside world. Prison gangs, EME in particular, will not stop. They are a constant threat to society. Some of them need a dirt nap, dead and buried. This is the only solution for them. The gist of the Senate committee hearing was that many of the 1,500 SHU inmates were unfairly validated as gang members and held for indeterminate terms at Pelican Bay, Corcoran, and Tehachapi. Jailhouse lawyer and MA associate Steve Casillo debriefed sometime after the Senate hearings and told gang investigators that, in truth, he knew of only one inmate who was ever placed in the SHU after being validated incorrectly, a mafia associate who was mistakenly identified as a full-blown carnal. One longtime gang investigator said it was a lie perpetrated by Prison Focus and Castillo. We knew it was a lie. All their arguments were bogus. What was most disturbing was they had a senator who was backing them on their arguments. In fact, Castillo later sent a letter of apology to Senator Romero explaining that he had lied and manipulated her. Steve Moore, assistant director of the CDC Law Enforcement Investigations Unit, ordered Devin Hawks not to look into Senator Romero or her aide Rocky Rushing and their possible relationship with EME. Moore felt that there wasn't evidence warranting an investigation, and in any event, that it was not the CDC's place to investigate the person who oversaw the agency. He felt that it should be up to the FBI or the California Highway Patrol. They didn't do it either. Renee was disillusioned. He listened to hours of surveillance tape about Senator Romero, Rocky Rushing, Steve Castillo, Charles Carbone, Jesse Enriquez, Jaco Padilla, and others with an interest in changing the SHU policy that so impacted EME. Sergeant Richard Valdemar was disappointed with CDC. He, like others, wondered why a state senator would take such an interest in prison conditions of the Mexican Mafia. There was growing pressure from CDC headquarters in Sacramento to settle the Castillo lawsuit. Deputy Attorney General Gregory Walston quit his job in frustration. Walston went into private practice. There was conflict between the politically minded people in the AG's office, and it was annoying. It was preventing my client, the correctional officers, from having their day in court. The Castillo case was still set to go to trial in December 2003. Warden McGrath pressured Renee to testify for the state, threatening to call him as a hostile witness. Enriquez cockily asked for some relocation money and other considerations, and his demands weren't met. These people, top CDC executives, were duplicitous, observed Renee. They didn't want to go after the mob, they only wanted to kill the lawsuit. There were also other video surveillance videotapes shot in the PBSP visiting room implicating MA members and their associates in murder and other crimes. The tapes disappeared, and so did any attempt to prosecute the offenders. They had a high-ranking MA member operating as an informant within the mafia ranks, and Renee said the CDC still wouldn't do anything. He finally decided that the CDC had a deliberate indifference to the entire mafia mess. Renee stopped cooperating. He had found that politics are everywhere, not just in EME. CDC Director Edward Almeida resigned in December 2003. He was caught in a storm of allegations that he impeded investigations into charges that Pelican Bay correctional officers committed perjury in inmate abuse trials. Almeida denied the allegations. Senator Gloria Romero, a vocal opponent of the director, wanted his head on a stick. It was not until May of 2004 that the CDC finally entered into a settlement agreement with the Prison Focus on Castillo's lawsuit. The CDC ended up making certain concessions in its administration of the SHU program, giving inmates the right to challenge evidence that they were in a prison gang and requiring investigators to detail how a piece of evidence indicated gang affiliation. Gang investigators felt that the agreement seriously compromised their ability to properly do their jobs, especially since it watered down the importance of facts obtained from informants. None of that mattered much to Rene Enriquez anymore. In August of 2003, he was transferred to a facility closer to home, Lancaster State Prison, 75 miles north of Los Angeles. Living on the main line, he was hoping for a less complicated, mafia-free, drug-free existence. Lieutenant Ernie Madrid lamented that we had this tool, Rene Enriquez, who was willing to work with us, dynamic and intelligent. Why were we going to let all this work go? The answer I got was budget and politics. Madrid also worried that Rene is not the kind of guy who will sit in prison and rot away unnoticed.